Good morning. Welcome to the library, and in particular, welcome to the Mud Box, which when it isn't functioning as an event and seminar space, it's a cafe for the students in particular as they're in the library. I'm Nancy Davenport. I'm the university librarian, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this morning to the Larissa Gerstel Symposium. It's an annual event that takes place co-sponsored by the library and the School of Education, Teaching, and Health, and we're really proud to be able to do that. Before I turn this over to Sarah to do her part of the welcome, I want to do a little bit of the Nielsen kind of things and figure out what the demographics of our audience. So how many of you are here because you came for All-American Weekend and you're an alum? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have about 5 or 6 for that reason. Okay. How many of you are here this morning because you're students here at current students at AU? Ah, big part of the house are here for that reason. How many of you are here because you're local teachers and you came looking at this as part of in-service? Yeah, that's good. Teachers, how many of you are here because you were teachers and you regarded this as in-service? Thank you. Did I miss any big demographic? Because we always want to know why people come and why this is of interest, and particularly why you find it important and compelling to be part of that your teacher toolbox that you take into the classroom every day. So we are here in the library to help you in any way that we can, particularly you who are students, and I know some of you are actually employed by the library, but we are very much in the business of rethinking this complete library. We've spent the past year looking at how we're going to build the library of the 21st century. And we have plans now that we are in the process of always benchmarking against our students and against our faculty. So we look forward to be able to engage with you in that. And now to also welcome you to this program, let me introduce to you Dean Sarah Irvine Belson, Dean of the School of Education, Teaching, and Health. Sarah?
Thank you, Nancy, and thanks to all the library staff, particularly Alex, for all the wonderful work that you do with the collection, and particularly the synergies that you help us develop between the library and the School of Education, Teaching, and Health. Without your work and your great work in the collection and the wonderful work that's in the Curriculum Materials Center, we would not be able to carry on in the great ways that we do and support our teachers and our aspiring teachers. I also want to thank, obviously, the staff behind the scenes that make this all happen, particularly Danielle Sodani, wherever you are. Hi, Danielle. Thank you for all your great work in getting things done. And as usual, I want to thank Robin and Cheryl for all your great work, and Bob, you too, for what you're doing. And I won't lug my annual pumpkin up here, but your pumpkin and your flowers are in the back. And it's kind of become a tradition of, it always happens around pumpkin season that we do this. So, and then finally, I want to just thank all of you. I mean, if you didn't come, we wouldn't do this. So I want to thank the local teachers, our students, everyone who's here today to hear about the great work that Alida and Kristin, and Sean do in the work that they do in terms of understanding literacy. So again, thanks to all of you for coming out. My daughter tells me this is an early Saturday morning, so I appreciate you're all coming out and being part of that. And without further ado, I'm turning it over to Alida. Yes, correct? Oh, Vivian. Oh, I'm sorry, Vivian. Where are you, Vivian? Oh, there you are. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Vivian Vasquez. Vivian is a full professor. That means she's crossed every T and gone through every mark in terms of the academic hoops that we have her put through. She's the author now of 10. Are we now at double digits with number of books? 10 books in the field of critical literacy, so she's just doing laps around the rest of us, Alida, by the way. But anyway, my colleague Vivian is also a wonderful leader and a huge influence on our school. So without further ado, Vivian Vasquez.
Thank you, Dean Sarah. So, well, first of all, thank you all again for being here this morning. It's always such a wonderful event and opportunity to catch up with people. So for me, the symposium is always a highlight because it's a celebration of life, literacy, community, and family. And today we get to welcome some new folks into that community. One of the things I ask myself when considering suggestions for keynote speakers in particular is who could offer some new insights and create some new spaces for us to think about the books that are in the Larissa Gerstel collection, critical literacy, and the work with diverse learners, which was an important part of Larissa's teaching. And, you know, one of the things that comes to mind is also this question of, you know, what would Larissa do? And how would Larissa feel about the panelists that we invite? This year, the name that immediately came to mind is Dr. Alida Anderson, who's an associate professor in the School of Education, Teaching, and Health. Alida's vision for arts-based teaching and learning inspires her colleagues and her students to consider what it means to support the needs of students with disabilities through the use of arts integration. Notably, she's in the process of having published her first book on arts integration in special education. And there's a detailed academic profile for Alida in your program. Aside from sharing an academic life, our sons go to each other's birthday parties. So our relationship crosses multiple life spaces, and what I've learned from having Alida in my life is that her passion and caring for whatever she does sees no bounds, and I'm proud to have her as both a colleague and a friend. So without further ado, welcome, Alida.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Vivian, and thank you, everybody, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm honored to speak with you today at this important event, the annual Larissa Gerstel Critical Literacy Symposium, and I hope that my address today contributes to celebrating Larissa's life, her contributions and gifts, and her educational legacy and her legacy to literacy as well. Larissa's journey and her accomplishments, they spoke to me directly as she was described by her family, her professors and peers as working tirelessly and creatively with her students from diverse linguistic, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds to help them gain access to and participate and progress in academic settings. And I was reminded of my own journey as a young teacher, using every available avenue to reach and teach my students. Of course, creativity through art making, whether we were doing a mural painting or working on the sidewalk with chalk drawing or constructing dream houses, these activities never struck me as less than. In fact, they always seemed to me to be the opposite. They reached beyond the conventional academic space. And so I think with that, I'd like to talk about how art has existed in our human history. The arts have been a way for us to communicate, to understand history about our world and concepts of spirituality. The arts have enabled us as human beings to express and convey very critical and complex thoughts, feelings, and ideas that transcend more conventional channels. And when I say conventional channels, I'm speaking about the conventional literacy channels of the printed and the spoken word. Art has also given us a sense of our past, our present, and our future. And what I would like to suggest is that conventional literacy, or the command over spoken and printed words, is in fact technology, or its tool use. And I think that Picasso said it best, that creativity and exploration are at the heart of living and learning. And I would submit today, and perhaps Larissa would submit this too, that students are entitled to learn this way. That and further, I'd like to submit it at our symposium today that we challenge the expectations that we have of literacy, and that is the conventional use of the tools of oral and written language for conveying our ideas. My position on this comes, and a lot of the arts in education position comes very directly from influences from Reggio Emilia's education system. That is very much in regarding the inclusion and promotion of children with diverse learning needs. And the Reggio Emilia system has also influenced Maria Montessori's work and a lot of the work in early childhood programs. But one of the main features, and there are two, that really support the arts in education and the inclusion of diverse learners is the role of the environment as the third teacher. And the idea that educators in the Reggio Emilia approach are very concerned about what their school environments are teaching their children. And hence, great attention is given to the look and the feel of the environment. And so that's one key feature of inclusive arts-based education. Another one is the notion of children having multiple symbolic languages, that verbal language is only one of these languages. And the idea that the arts can be a symbolic language frees children and also their teachers to help begin expression of understanding about the world, the presentation of concepts and hypotheses in multiple forms, so that we can really understand what children are experiencing and also give voice to it. And you know, Vivian mentioned community, that we can share in these understandings. I put on here that it's consistent with Gardner's notion of multiple intelligences theory, which calls for the integration of arts as a tool for really accessing cognitive, linguistic, and affective or emotional social development. So these are really important key features for why we think the arts really does support an inclusive environment for learning. But I do need to return to this idea of conventional literacy. As I said before, I would like our presentation today to challenge the expectations we have for literacy. So not to repeat myself too much, but the conventional use of tools of oral and written language for conveying our ideas. And underneath the tool use, I would submit, is the how and why. It's how and why we use it. And I would like to suggest further that the how and why of our communicative intent is interconnected with our cognitive and our affective intentions. And further, I call this intent engagement. Much has been written about engagement. It seems to be, everybody would agree that engagement is important for success in school and in life. But it's also extremely challenging to define. It's even more difficult to operationalize or to measure. If you ask a neuropsychologist about engagement, they might tell you we measure it and we define it by sustained attention or how much time you spend on task. If you ask an artist or somebody who's an educator, I remember I gave a talk at the Kennedy Center and we presented all this research and the findings on how kids performed linguistically after arts integration, and somebody raised their hand and they said, but did they have any fun? You know, engaging, isn't it supposed to be fun if it's engaging? You know, so we, you know, I really want to sort of unpeel this idea of engagement. And critical literacy, I would submit, you know, we have some definitions up here, certainly has a community-centered notion, and it addresses from political and social conditions. And Comer talks about the use of tools, tool use, like I'm talking to you today, about starting to question or inquire about what exists in our communities and social issues. And the third definition is this idea of critical, you know, very closely linked to the notion of critical thinking. So asking questions about how something works or why it works, what its effects are, who does it, who produces a particular text, and under what kinds of circumstances, and what are the audience. So these critical literacy definitions really do create some sort of tension with what is considered conventional literacy tools. And I think that if we think about critical literacy and engagement, you know, we have this wonderful piece of art, probably everybody knows it, as Picasso's Guernica, but we have this idea of abstract thought or cognition being consistently represented through metaphors. And these metaphors, these are representations of our physical, our sensory, and our emotional experiences. So we might even define engagement that way. And that is the essence of what art does, right? So a little bit more about engagement, but are we engaged? Now, this is nothing really too sophisticated. This is actually just a dictionary definition of engagement with a, you know, a very nice webbing to it. But what I thought was striking about it is that engagement has aspects of obligation to it, choice or not, or being assigned, right? It has an indication of being employed or appointed. It also has this idea of voluntariness or choice, being a participant, and also this idea that engagement may not necessarily always be a good thing, right? Conflict. And I think that these are important aspects when we think about whether our students are engaged, because the implications of choice, voice, and access are very clear when we think about these different ideas of engagement. For instance, in terms of access, in order to be enmeshed, right, or interlocked in a particular thing, you have to be able to access that thing. And, you know, when we think about kids being engaged in literacy, oftentimes those kids who are disengaged in literacy are locked out. They don't have access to the conventional tool use. And so that's really at the heart of arts and learning, at least in my mind. The roots of engagement, you know, we can look at human development of cognition, language, and emotion or affect as being rooted in our sensory system, in our vision, in our hearing, in the way we move. And, you know, some little notes, if I were to be more sophisticated, I might play you a little snippet of a musical score. And that musical score, we've seen in research, it creates expectations in our brains. The rhythm of the music, everything that you've heard before creates certain expectations. Dance movement has another way of engaging us. You know, from our very beginnings, you know, on the earth, we are exploring things physically and sensorially. And so dance has another aspect of direct engagement through sensory systems. Visual art, as Piaget said, is really the first indication that we are mentally representing something from our heads out for somebody else. And so this idea of engagement, we can see it enacted through our sensory experiences with the world. So what is arts integration? Well, if I'm talking about the arts and learning, I'm speaking pretty specifically. I put this continuum up here, and I use the continuum of the role of arts in education, because most of us, if I had a little red dot, most of us are pretty familiar with this conventional way of thinking about art. We have the specials, right? You go to your art class, and then you go back to your English class, and maybe you have a music class a couple times a week. On the other end of the continuum, you have the therapeutic use of art. You have the arts therapies, the music therapy, dance therapy. Those are things that are mental health governed. They're very intensive, and they're usually conducted by trained therapists. And in the middle, we have arts integration, multisensory content learning through process, and featuring classroom techniques. This is another way to look at the model here. But we have arts integration in the middle being something that exists in inclusion classrooms. It involves both kids in special education and general education, and really what separates it from conventional arts and education versus therapies is the idea that you're addressing both the arts standards and the academic standards. So an example of this would be using drama during language arts class. You're addressing the drama standards of maybe understanding the role of a particular character's emotions, or conveying or expressing a character's emotions. Maybe that's a drama standard, but you're also covering a language arts standard at the same time, okay? And the theory behind this, or the reason you would use arts integration, is that arts integration links the content area and the art form to reach a deeper level of engagement, learning, and reflection than would be possible without the art form. So it's this idea that there's this added value of the arts, okay, rather than just doing language arts conventionally. And that's a really important idea, that it's not just drawing a picture at the end of your language arts class. It's that you're reaching a deeper level of engagement than you would by not using the arts. Okay? And what the research shows, I promised I wouldn't be research heavy today, but the research shows that arts integration enhances learning and engagement. And that should all leave you wondering, well, gee whiz, what exactly does she mean by engagement, right? my position as a language educator and language researcher is to examine the role of context, the arts integrated context or the environment, as mediating language learning in students. But the research has shown, at least in the past decade, there hasn't been a lot of research yet. It's only about a decade old. But the relationship between arts integration, arts and non-arts or academic outcomes is largely underspecified. We really don't know very much about how and why arts integration facilitates language, cognition, or even emotion or affect. So that's really the job of the coming years and currently. But we do have lots of evidence for why it might work. And the connections come from universal design for learning. And if you're not familiar with universal design for learning, it comes directly from the area of architecture and creating universal access. So a good example is like a ramp in a building or getting down to a classroom. That ramp is optimal for everybody. It's not just going to create access for somebody with orthopedic disabilities, but it may help somebody with a young child who has a stroller. And in fact, you know, all my students, when they're tired, they're going to be taking that ramp, not the stairs, right? So it's actually optimal design for everybody. It enhances everybody's life. So that's the premise of universal design. The way that it's enacted, though, is through multiple means of representation, engagement, and action and expression. The other sort of cornerstone of arts integration is the idea of differentiated instruction. And differentiated instruction, just as UDL considers the strengths and needs to tailor individuals within the context of the group learning environment, differentiated instruction focuses on the dimensions of content, what is taught, the process, how students are going to process the information, and also the product, how the flexible ways for students to demonstrate their learning. So on the far side, I have particular arts integration approaches in drama and See, Think, Wonder routines, which we'll talk about, STW, being in role, using an idea of mantle of the expert, which I'm sure Kristin can tell us more about, using tableau, which are frozen moments where students enact, or using improvisation. These are all ways that students can also understand things and be engaged. And certainly multiple means of expression are fairly obvious. So a few little examples of my work in classroom arts integration, what this might look like. With respect to drama, inventing or enacting situations in academically related content. So Gettysburg Address would be social studies, right? And we might enact Lincoln's experience. The students might take on the role as Lincoln, writing the Gettysburg Address and trying to understand the situation and what the stressors were of the times. Another example might be using a superhero comic in a language arts class to help the students identify maybe the plot, the characters, the conflict, and maybe the resolution or the outcome. Little Red Riding Hood was a very successful project where we adapted the fairy tale with 4th and 5th graders to help them really take it on and give meaning to it from their own perspective. So they were, the protagonist became Wolfie Jr., and Little Red Riding Hood was framing Wolfie actually for hurting grandma, and so they had a big trial, and it was a fascinating experience, right? But these kids really took on the characters. And what we found is that, lo and behold, these kinds of activities have been associated with engagement and language outcomes, so social, emotional, and language outcomes. And the reasoning that I give it is that the activities are largely contextualized, and I'll talk a little bit about contextualization. My hypotheses have been that arts integration scaffolds language use to communicate increasingly specific, precise, and complex mental representations. And also that arts integration supports affective or emotional engagement through cognitive and linguistic engagement. So as you can see, my bias is as a language researcher. So certainly it comes from contextualized language intervention, so speech and language literature, heavily influenced by Vygotsky, the social interactionist. and really emphasizing the idea that the activity or the context, the environment, is the way to address the skill, rather than just the skill learning in isolation. And a little, some evidence about contextualized and decontextualized language. Contextualized language is very familiar. It's oftentimes very social. You're usually talking to somebody in a conversation. The vocabulary is repetitive and high frequency, and the syntax may be more simple. And decontextualized, on the other end of this continuum, is more formal, and it's usually featuring much more dense syntax and unknown vocabulary. It's usually monologic. So I have this little continuum at the bottom of pretend play probably being the most contextualized experience using language. And on the other end of the scale, the most decontextualized, the most academic discourse is like your scientific report or your content area textbook. And in the middle, you might have narrative or storytelling. And actually, what researchers say is the very first decontextualized language experiences that kids experience are those of storytelling, asking somebody what happened and to retell a story. And this is important because what we know about school and academic success, back to a conventional literacy, is that kids that learn to do school and the kids that learn to use decontextualized language, that specific language, do better. They're rewarded more. Those kids who talk like books really, really get teachers' attention, right? They speak that language. And that's an important thing because, remember, the language that we use, it depends on how closely it is related to the environment. So the more contextualized something is, probably the easier it is for kids to communicate about it. And so that's important because when kids are struggling with higher level reasoning, critical thinking, using just language alone, we want to be able to scaffold them to getting to that critical literacy point rather than keeping them at the lower level of processing. And I show this a different way because if you look at the abstraction levels, we really want kids to be analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating, right? Those are the things that engage them. I mean, if I ask all of you, who's more engaged? When you're just recalling or recognizing, or when you're actually giving an informed opinion about something, right? And that makes sense to us. But oftentimes, for our kids who are locked out of conventional literacy, we're so focused up here, right? And so they're disengaged. So this is a great example of why we need the arts in learning, and particularly in literacy learning. So, a See, Think, Wonder routine is a good example of how to do that. Just with it's called a thinking center routine for exploring works of art and other interesting things. So you can use this with visual art or sculpture, and you're literally, I don't know where that went. I'm not sure how to click on See, Think, Wonder, but if I pulled up the website from Project Zero, you could see questions being asked. Very, very much first, an observational kind of question. Oh, hello. So the first kind of question might be, what do I see? Just purely observing. Well, I see these two beautiful boys. And what does that make me think about? Well, it makes me think about my own son. I wonder what he's doing right now. He's 4, and he's a little younger than them. And why might that be up there? Well, we're having some technology problems, right? But the point is that we can begin to then become more critical. It's an entry point, right? If I just showed a student a text, right, a text describing those two little boys, and they had difficulty accessing the text conventionally, they would be completely locked out, right? And if you notice, the way I was looking at it, it was a social experience for me, right? I was drawing on my own experience and connecting it with something that I understood. And that's ultimately, it's a critical skill, right? That's what we want our kids to be doing. And, if we think about our developmental psychologists, assimilation and accommodation, that's how we create new understandings, right? We accommodate that previously held information about my 4-year-old, and I assimilate it with that beautiful picture. And that expands my understanding, right? So, See, Think, Wonder routines are artful thinking routines. They're, a very functional way to help observe. What do you see? What do you think about it? And what does it make you wonder? Really going beyond that. And it's an inquiry process, right? We all want kids to be inquiring, and that reaches across content areas. We can think about inquiry in the scientific disciplines. We think about inquiry in terms of critical examination of text and discourse. So it really is a powerful thinking routine. Thank you, Danielle. It's nice to have the visual, right? Easy. Project Zero, Artful Thinking. So back to some little bit of research. I promised I wouldn't get researchy today, but what I have found, at least, when I compare, and these are observational studies, where I'm comparing kids' language and teachers' language in arts integration and conventional language arts literacy contexts, lo and behold, the student discourse involves much higher level questioning and responding from students in arts integration contexts. Also, by contrast, we have much lower level forms of questioning and frank disengagement. Kids say less and they do things that are absolutely not related to language arts, i.e. crawling under desks, talking about each other's mothers, really not having anything to do with language arts, okay? So it's, I say it jokingly, but what that really means is that kids are just not getting it. They're not engaged. You think about the difference between being with you and just not having access or even choice or voice, right? Teacher discourse is more elaborative. They're asking more process questions, how questions, why questions. They're also asking a lot of who, what, when, where questions, product questions in arts integration. By contrast, and not unexpectedly, you're seeing a lot more regulative and corrective language in conventional language arts lessons, probably because they're trying to regulate and correct all of the behavior problems, right? They're not spending any time inquiring and helping get us deeper into the content. And what you might expect, when we measure behavioral engagement, how much time do they spend on task? What are they doing physically? Higher rates of on-task behavior in arts integration and higher rates of off-task behavior in language arts. And I say that because it's all kids. It's not just the kids with disabilities. It's all of the kids in the classroom, or most of the kids in the classroom. But when I look very specifically at oral and written language outcomes for both students with and without disabilities, I saw, and I've seen, it's been replicated, that all kids are more specific and more precise, as well as more productive. So they're writing more and they're speaking more in arts integration. And when, think back to decontextualized language, they're using more decontextualized language in arts integration. They're using more literate language features. And that's really important, right? It's scaffolding them to using conventional literacy tools. And it's also scaffolding them to express concepts, cause, time, sequences, relational reasoning, which is really back to critical literacy and critical thinking. And that's what we want our kids to be doing. And so they're engaged, right? And if we measured engagement, which we have, all students, meaning 100% of them, have been engaged behaviorally, on task, doing what the teacher wanted them to do. And by contrast, 63% of students were not engaged in conventional language arts activities. And I didn't separate the kids with and without disabilities. This is the whole class. 20% of the class is made up of kids with disabilities. So more than half the class has not been engaged in conventional language arts activities when I've looked. And with respect to linguistic specificity and productivity, I think that over time and exposure, we have to look at how that transfers. How does linguistic specificity and how much kids produce, how does that transfer across contexts? So how can we change our environments to support language? And certainly the concrete and the representational aspects of the arts integrated context, they support kids to be linguistically specific. And this kind of research is very consistent with what we've seen in the disability literature, where we see that concrete or representational activities support concept development and also the expression of ideas in kids with specific language impairments, learning disabilities, as well as in English language learning populations. So a couple implications from what I say today. One is for research, that we really need to go further to investigate the relationship between engagement and context. And also for practice, and I'm hoping that's where we're really going to focus today, in terms of professional development and training in arts integration approaches, along with evidence-based practices to support literacy skill learning with students from diverse learning backgrounds. And so what I propose in closing here is a model. Looking at the dimensions of engagement from affective, cognitive, and linguistic places. And I borrowed a path model from reading, because reading has probably been the area of literacy most studied. And what we've come to the conclusion of with reading, at least, is that there's multiple factors. Each factor contributes independently to reading, but combined, they also contribute even more powerfully. So I think that that's a really important way for us to think about engagement, right? That we have a direct path between arts integration and engagement, but that we have particular paths between arts integration and the different dimensions of engagement, and that all of these are mutually influential through arts integration. So I think that's really what I wanted to say today, and I know it's a lot. I don't have a clock in here, so I have no idea what time it is, except for that I'm hoping that we can open it up to our panelists now. Questions, right? Or should we wait for the panel, right?
Wait for the panel?
Wait for the panel?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, if you're dying.
Does anybody have any burning questions that they need to ask right now? No?
Okay. Would you like me to?
Right, I'm going to ask Kristin and Sean to head on over to the table, and while they're doing that, introduce each of them. Kristin Nagy is the coordinator for the after-school program and arts integration at Bridges Public Charter School. Kristin is originally from Michigan and has been working in education for 9 years. She began her career in teaching through the New Teacher Project as a member of the DC Teaching Fellows, and has taught both general and special education in urban schools in Washington, D.C. and Minneapolis, Minnesota. When she's not working, Kristin enjoys writing and art making, as well as being outdoors. She's an amateur furniture maker, short story writer, and adventurer, and is hoping to one day go pro. Sean. All right. So Sean Nolan is an upper division art teacher at National Presbyterian School. Before coming to the East Coast, Sean worked as a teaching artist at the Children's Theater Company of Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as spending 3 tours performing and directing with the Missoula Children's Theater. Sean holds his BA in Media Studies and Comparative Literature from the University of Minnesota. He's interested in ways that students can develop character and alternative perspectives through the arts, and is currently residing in Arlington, Virginia with his wife Shanti and his dog Penny. Also about Sean, when I thought about this panel, Sean is currently a student in my children's lit class, and I just thought his thoughtful and insightful contributions very early on in the class that I teach really led me to encourage his participation on the panel today. And just one more word about Sean. I think really the future of young children today, shines brightly, knowing that we have teachers like Sean in their lives. So let's get this panel going. I don't know what Kristin to make some comments, and then Sean, and then we'll open it up.
Sure. I really began my work in arts integration as a classroom teacher. I taught many things, but most recently language arts for middle school students. And I was fortunate enough to be in a graduate certificate program here at AU and learned a lot about kind of all of the stuff that Alida just shared. And at the same time, as a teacher, was able to bring that into my practice very intentionally, and saw some really wonderful results from those arts integration strategies that I used. And I think that part of the really wonderful things that I saw in this work is that I was able to reach students that were general education students and students with some pretty severe special needs and bring them together as a community in a way that I hadn't been able to do just using the kind of scripted curriculum that the school had given to us. So I got to see kind of firsthand the results through their engagement, through their cognitive growth, kind of across the board, just really positive successes from this type of work.
Thank you. I first wanted to thank everyone for having me on the panel here, and I want to thank Alida and Kristin and Vivian and Carol and Dean Belson. I really appreciate it. As an art teacher, the idea of arts integration is tremendously powerful, and the benefits to classroom teachers, it has benefits to classroom teachers as well as specialists. As an art specialist, I place a premium on collaboration. In reference to Reggio Emilia, the idea that a student can approach a project from a different and varying perspectives is tremendously valuable. When studying form in an art class, a student can make the choice to, a teacher can make the choice to go and study statues. They can draw the statue, they can sit there and study how the statue is shaped and different things, or they can actually draw a picture of what the statue sees, people walking by in the park or wherever, and draw those forms instead. And it's those varying perspectives that I find to be very powerful and create very different types of learning and access different ways of thinking for students. I had a couple of slides I wanted to share about a project that I've been working on for the past couple of months that spoke to a lot of the different things that Alida had referenced. And this project is with my 6th grade art students, and it's a collaboration between our classroom teachers, social studies teachers, and music teachers. What happened was our social studies teachers, they have a curriculum that's based on on 20th and 21st century social studies. And there's a lot of sensitive material in that. For 6th graders, you want to respect their intelligence, of course, because they know a lot about this stuff. But at the same time, you want to pardon my, using, a buzz term, but, safeguard the decade of childhood. You want to be able to balance both of those things. So the teachers wanted to cover September 11th. Many of these students were not alive then. Many of them, all of them, still know about this time in our world and in our society. So they wanted us to work on ways to collaborate with the students to understand but also engage with it. And we began by reading 14 Cows for America, a fascinating book that sort of takes the idea of September 11th and looks at it from a different perspective. It allows students to sort of take a step back, look at the process and look at the issues that surrounded September 11th, and then we can move forward from there. What we did first was in art, this is our final product, and we'll go back to this. But what we did in art is we studied inspiration and community art. This statue here is an example that resides in the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York. This statue, it was unadorned, had nothing on it, was left in front of the firehouse for Engine 54 and Ladder 4, Battalion 9, in the weeks following September 11th. They lost 15 of their men, and the statue was left out in front. As the weeks carried on, different community members started placing items of, that reminded them of New York and of the people that were lost on this. And it became sort of a movement in that community and a representation of healing for that firehouse. We looked at this and talked about how we as a community can build a piece of art. So we then, in music class, we looked, they explore 20th century and contemporary music. And we looked at traditional types of music, America the Beautiful, different things, Star Spangled Banner, different things like that. And we asked, why are these important? And none of our students could answer that, other than connection to our tradition and our patriotism. But none of them really had a sort of invested place for it because they've just been told that these are important things. So what we did was we took America the Beautiful, the sheet music for it, and we cut it apart and cut out every piece of music, or every phrase from it, every word. We took that and we scattered them about, and every student had to collect 2 pieces of it, and we put it back together out of order to create a new song from America the Beautiful that is sort of chaotic and out of order, very 21st century contemporary music. We then took a variety of different monuments, icons of America, and we placed that new sheet music onto them and created these monuments as our new score, our new sheet music. In different ways of looking at a piece of paper and a piece of music, a piece of art. We attached them so that you could read the monuments as their musical score. The students you can see that there's the sheet music on each piece. We then in art asked about what style we should paint these in. Students thought that they had a lot of conflicted ideas about September 11th. It was very emotional, and so they did not think any sort of uniformity should be placed on it. They wanted to splatter paint it. I mean, part of it was they just really like splatter paint, let's be honest. But also at the same time, it fits. It fits very well. It is a choice that speaks to that time, as many of us recall. So we spent time creating this. I'm sorry, let me go back to, and in the end, we had this, our new sheet music that is covered with splatter paint that they can then read and perform the piece of music from as a concert for their parents. It's really hard to sing music out of order, especially if it's a piece that is so ingrained in your head, like America the Beautiful. But one of the beautiful things about it, though, is that through reconstructing this, the monuments, the painting, this music, they made their own mark on it. They created these songs, created this song, their own version of this song that spoke to September 11th, and also spoke to a way that now it was very important and personal to them. We have this piece of art here and our sheet music, and what we have done with this is the students then created, my slides got out of order, sorry. They created a poem that was their final response out of it. And in this poem, they, as a group, had to write it. We went to the teachers went to the side of the room and let them kind of duke it out. And our next step in this is actually tomorrow, Monday morning, we are going to be speaking with Captain Dan Booth at the Pentagon in the Public Affairs Department, and to figure out to schedule a time for him to come to our school so that we can present him with this art, present him with this piece, and we can move forward with documenting it and showing people that even though these students may not have been alive at this time, these students still care about what happened, and they understand that we can't forget it. And so this is one way that myself, as an educator, I don't want students to just recycle. I don't want to have to just give them information and have them take it, oh, you know, September 11th happened. It was really bad, and here are the reasons why. I want them to be able to reconstruct a reality that they are deeply invested in, and I think that speaks to the engagement that Alida was talking about earlier. Thank you.
Excellent.
Aren't they inspirational? What an amazing panel, right? Before we open the floor for questions, I wonder if any of you have anything you'd like to say, you know, regarding each other's comments, or?
Well, I was, you know, furiously scribbling away, and as probably most of you were. But one of the things that I noticed right away was the idea of the collaboration involved, the community and the project work, and this idea of balancing sensitive with sort of where the person is in their own experience, and the entryway into content, right? I also thought there were some really interesting examples of like consonance and dissonance with respect to the splatter painting. And, you know, when I thought about, you know, the sensory experience of just the splatter paint, and maybe not necessarily even connecting with the intent of what it conveys, but through the process. I mean, really, your slides really showing it being about process And, the end product of those poems was those students' journeys to getting to the place of processing their reality with that historical piece of what September 11th means. And, and also the idea that, back to the idea that art can transcend what really what something in maybe a conventional news clip really couldn't, it couldn't get to. And so I really appreciate those examples, because I think it really brings to life some of the earlier points in terms of, and then how beautifully the use of the conventional tools of literacy, those poems were, right, articulations of. But that was my impressions.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the topic, how it's sort of like a heavier topic for young students, and I found in my teaching experience as well, like sometimes allowing students to explore topics that maybe might seem like risky or emotional for them often kind of elicits like a very like deep response, because it is stuff that they care about. And even though it's hard for us to talk about, like I think using the arts is a way to kind of bring everyone together and have this like place that's like safer to come to and talk about things that might be harder for us as adults to talk about with students.
Earlier, Alida, you had mentioned the idea of having fun and enjoying a project. And during this project, early on, one of my students, William, he stopped and he asked, are we allowed to be enjoying ourselves while we're doing this? Is that okay? And, we kind of stopped and said, wow, that was a really thoughtful question, actually, because, and he was trying to find that place, the balance between being respectful and honoring this idea and this moment, but also, like, he was enjoying the process of this, and he didn't want to go too far to cross that line because he was learning where that line was. And so, we were able to say, we hope you're enjoying yourself. Think about how you're showing that in the room and everything. But he made me think, because that seems like such a silly question, but also it's a really profound question for a 12-year-old. So.
Great point.
Sean's students, we had the pleasure of actually listening to their singing. So he brought some audio to class this past week where you could hear them singing the song. And, this is like really complex stuff, because they had to sort of really disrupt their normalized notions about the songs they were singing and the words, the lyrics that went along with those, and to sort of come up with these new representations. And it's just makes for an even more powerful experience. Any other comments from you before we open it up? No? All right, comments, questions, connections from the floor? Patricia?
This question is for Sean. I have a mic if we can. This question is for Sean. I noticed that the poem was very accurate in terms of the emotions that stirred during the 9/11 controversy. I was just wondering, what research did you do with your students, if any, to help them grasp such a keen understanding of what was going on? Because you did mention that they weren't born at the time.
In social studies, they did cover sort of the news clip kind of sort of by the numbers, by the sort of issues-based kind idea, and then this allowed for them to then sort of internalize that and then through a group sort of democratic process put it onto paper. I mean, it was very loud in the room during this time. There was a lot of arguing over little words and choices. What was the best term? There was the idea, the word destruction, actually, in this. There was this one side that wanted to write decimation and one side that wanted destruction, and they battled for 15 minutes about this one word, and destruction won, as you can see, because it actually is more appropriate, and their side argued it better. But the idea that they can get by the numbers and just the facts, ma'am, kind of idea, and then take that and focus it into this in a different room, in a different setting, where they don't have to sit there and be quiet and just listen to the teacher talk or ask questions that were posed to them. I found to be valuable and a valuable way for them to internalize what actually they were receiving in social studies. So as I had said before, as a specialist, I find arts integration to not only enhance the general ed classroom side of things, but also my art classroom, my art studio is all the stronger because classroom teachers come in every day, and ask like, hey, we're covering this in a couple weeks. Let's talk about this. What can we do? And, of course, you got to draw the line somewhere because you got to teach them some art for, as well. But there is actually a great collaboration that happens with that. And coming from a theater background, I value collaboration tremendously.
Can I ask another question? I just wanted to elaborate. It's not really a question. It's more like a comment. I was just thinking that it would also be a great idea to have had the students interview family members, parents about where they were at that time, to get feedback. Because looking at the poem, it seems like they actually had some. So that social studies class must have been really thorough.
I made a note. Thanks. That's a good idea.
And just to respond also a little bit further, I think that there's some great examples of the bidirectionality between arts and literacy, so that it isn't just, we don't just need to think of the arts as sort of being the way to get kids to conventional literacy. Also, conventional literacy can inform arts, that it goes both ways, that, it's not, and a lot of times we see this with different learners. They may not necessarily come to that aha moment with a vocabulary term until they've actually worked through the art part of it. And furthermore, the art can help support the vocabulary use. So I think it's really important to think about it bidirectionally.
I just wanted to say I'm blown away by all of what I've heard today. And just in one way, why don't all of you write a book to get all of this out there? And I hope you're doing some teacher research over here to document it all. I say that more specifically, though, because when I was in the classroom teaching 2nd and 3rd grade, we were an arts-focused school. And 9/11 actually was my first year of teaching, so I still get very emotional about it. And our responses to that time were through the arts, and we painted pictures, and some kids did nothing at all, and that's where they were, because they were 8 years old. Others just did paint all over a piece of paper, and you couldn't tell. Others did children holding hands and jumping out of buildings. So it was an amazing way to see where the children were as far as processing that time. So I share that with you also in the sense that that was now 10, 11, 12 years ago. And the school, as I was there for 7 years, I watched the arts become smaller and smaller and eventually become more of a standard that you hit as you plugged through your day. And not to turn this into the more pessimistic kind of place, but within some of the public schools, I'll say some of the public schools now, with all the testing, this incredibly valuable type of teaching has been pushed away. And it's, here's your worksheet, let's practice how to take a test, let's bubble in, let's do multiple choice. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are as far as how to break that and keep such teaching alive. Because I know a lot of teachers struggle with that, and it's very hard. It depends on your administration. Depends if you just want to close your door and say bye-bye and do your thing. But what have you experienced just as far as having that question posed to you in the past? And I'm thinking of some of the future teachers out here, too. How can they best bring this into their classrooms?
Can I take it first? So thank you for raising that issue, Carolyn. And that really has been sort of pushing my agenda, because arts integration, what we've seen at least in urban schools, the role of the arts, and the most recent IES report from 2012 says that there's very little arts going on, arts education, the conventional approaches, going on in our urban schools. So the kids who may be most in need of those kinds of resources have the least access to them. And so what I've been hoping to support, both with the Catalyst schools, the DC Catalyst schools, and some of the other public school systems that are recognizing this inequity, that arts integration can hopefully support content learning standards and address the pressures that teachers and administrators face in terms of addressing the content area, but also accessing the arts at the same time. And I think that's all to say that our research needs to get smarter, and we need to have more dollars to actually prove, really give proof, give the evidence that's going to support getting these approaches into classrooms. My agenda is really trying to connect conventional tool use with the arts, because after all, if we can't show how and why it works, it's not going to get funded. And that's really, as sad as it is, that's the fiscal austere times we live in. But I also want to turn it over to Kristin, because she has lived that reality.
Yeah, I think that you brought up a good point about just like how testing compartmentalizes everything so much. And I think I've found through projects I've done, and it sounds like Sean's project is very much like, it just lends itself to like cross-curricular learning. And I know when I was doing some of the big projects in my language arts classes, teachers from other subject areas would come in and say, the kids are talking about this, like, how can I get involved in this? And how can I, like, jump onto these topics and bring this into our social studies class or our science class? And one of the big projects I did that during the time that I was studying arts integration here at AU was this filmmaking project, and I worked with students to analyze films and recreate them using like artistic techniques. And the teacher from the science class was like, well, they were studying like the environment and like recycling and stuff, but he was like, but why don't I bring in like filmmaking, and they did stop motion animation films about recycling. And then we were studying the film and the novel The Outsiders, and the social studies teacher was doing like the legal process and like how like the courts work and stuff like that. So she made this like mock trial in her class that was based on topics from the book. And everyone just really got excited about being this community and building these things together, and the kids were really focused on it. They seemed to want to come to school more. They were really engaged. They were asking questions. They were doing research on their own at home that we didn't ask them to do, and coming back and telling us about it. And it was students at all levels. It wasn't just like our highest achieving students. It was students that didn't really respond much to anything else we had done, were really engaged in this process. And overall, like, kids were getting along better. They were working together. They were getting along better with teachers, with people that weren't even really related to our like middle school community, but that they would interact with. They were just overall had a better outlook on what was going on at school.
There's a couple questions here.
I was looking for Sarah Belson.
Or behind, no, there.
And I just wondered if it'd be appropriate if you would talk about your experience with the lab school here in Washington, if that's, and learning through the arts and those students there.
Absolutely. And Alida, I think you might, and I'm just going to use my teacher voice for a second, unless you don't think I need the microphone very loud yet. Alida also does her research at the lab school as well. And if you don't know it, which I'm sure a lot of people in the room know it far too well, Evelyn. Evelyn is one of the teachers and the librarian of the lab school. It's a school for children with significant learning disabilities, language-based learning disabilities, and it is a fully arts engaged program.
And I think that's a great connection, too. So thank you for raising that, because what I hope is that the teachers that we're training are going to be in those schools that may not necessarily have the arts as much, and they can bring that disciplinary perspective to their classrooms. Everything that occurs at the lab school has some sort of arts dimension to it, which is really important. I have to say that Sally Smith was a visionary, right? She created that school in the 60s. So she was doing arts integration long before there was even the term arts integration. So when I say the past decade of arts integration research, Sally Smith was doing work back in the 60s, but nobody called it that because lab school was a self-contained school. You know, it wasn't existing in inclusive school environments, but lo and behold, the general education sphere has really figured out that this is a way to go. And if, you know, not just for kids with disabilities, but for all kids. And I think it's this the critical piece, the critical literacy connections, the conventional, you know, and the thinking skills, the affect, and the emotion that we can tap.
Can I just finish? To me, my exposure to the lab school, too, was, you know, over 40 years ago when I was in elementary school or longer. And, I mean, these were the kids in my generation that wound up in shop class that were disruptive, that nobody appreciated why they were having trouble learning. And the lab school, you know, and Sally, again, you know, saw what was going on there and that they learned differently and appreciating, you know, their ability to achieve and to want to achieve and to think positively about what they do. So,
Absolutely. And I mean, if we look at now in our culture, in our history, we appreciate neurodiversity. We need it, right, to solve the most, you know, complex and troubling things that we have going on today. So I think that, you know, the appreciation and embracing of diversity is what Sally really, the legacy that she really paved the way for. So thank you for raising that, Anne.
Hi, my name is Dominique Russell. I'm a special educator. I was in middle school. Now I'm in high school. But I just want to say, I don't know if there's any young aspiring teachers in here, but I completely agree that when art is integrated, students are definitely more engaged. I found it easier in middle school than I do in high school because some teachers I notice have a much more difficult time making the project or whatever it is as meaningful or as to expand beyond art and have some much more you know, deeper level of learning going on. So I would love to see a website or something where, you know, we teachers all grab ideas, right? We all are scavengers and we tuck all the good ideas into our pockets and hang on to them and adapt them to our own lessons. So I would love to see that, and so I had wanted to ask if there was any, you know, good sites out there that you could recommend, because it is a little more difficult at the high school level. I tuck all the good ones that I see away. But other than that, I had wanted to say that I have used art to even introduce concepts in a different way. With my middle schoolers, I did a lesson on inference so that they would I showed them a picture and asked them what they saw. And just like that picture with the two boys, instead of saying, I see two boys, they're hugging each other or holding each other, that's not what they said. They don't, when you look at art, you don't repeat what you see. You don't report on what you see. You automatically make inferences. And that's what they did. They automatically, of course, made inferences, which they don't do when they read text. So I used this lesson. I said, okay, I tried to help them distinguish between what is reporting on what they see versus making an inference, and how naturally it comes when we see pictures. If they looked at those two boys, they would say, well, I see two boys that are really happy. And they would venture a guess as to why they're happy. Maybe they, you know, they're friends, they have a play date after school. So they automatically want to make inferences. So then I read them a story that I created about Little Red Riding Hood all grown up already. And she's not necessarily a good kid. She's turned into kind of an unruly teenager, but I don't spell this out for them. And then I had them draw the picture of what they think this picture might look like. So I kind of did a reverse thing. So I think that art is a really useful, wonderful way of engaging. So I'm enjoying this very much. Thank you.
Oh, and may I respond directly? You know, in terms of resources, I'm sure you know Project Zero's website that I clicked on. The thinking routines in there can go all the way through high school, and they also have different lessons, and so you can get great resources there.
Yeah, if you could show that website.
Yeah, I think it's PZ
Oh, okay.
at harvard.edu, or it's we can
I have
the AIMS, the Arts Education of Maryland Schools, I think it's called AIMS, AEMS. That website and that organization has tremendous resources. And they also identify catalyst schools, not just the DC catalyst schools, but the Maryland schools. And each of those schools has tremendous resources. And NAEA, the National Arts Education Association, is another great place. But I do want to recognize your comment, which is, and what we do see in the literature and the research is that by the time people start thinking about secondary education, it's like you don't want kids to get their hands dirty. You want them to be nose in the textbook, decontextualized, 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 you know. And I think that's a real, it's very under-researched as compared to the elementary grades. Middle and secondary is very under-researched by comparison, and I think it's an area that we really do need to look more deeply into. So what you're saying, it actually does exist, you know, the dearth of evidence. But I also wanted to point out, you know, this idea of inferencing. We know that that's an evidence-based strategy for reading comprehension. It's been proven, right? Inferencing, predicting, accessing prior knowledge, all of those things we've proven in special education and general education. And so now the next step for our research is to actually show how the role of the arts contributes to that. You know, it doesn't seem like a particularly hard study to carry out, but there's just not a lot of funding out there to do it. So you raise an excellent point. You know?
One other thing for high school resources, you might want to try the Expeditionary Learning website. They have a lot of projects on there. I think that you can access it without logging in, but even if you can't research or access all of it, they should have some like featured projects, and they do a lot with high schoolers. So, and there are a lot that would be easy to replicate or adapt.
My first year of teaching, I taught self-contained 6th grade, everything except art, gym, and music. And we had to teach, in history, we had to teach prehistory through modern Europe. And by January, I had gotten to Rome, ancient Rome. And we were doing everything you're talking about, arts integration stuff, and having a lot of fun. And I had some kids who had been marked as slow learners and stupid, and I had them, and everybody knew they were stupid, and I thought these boys were great, and they really came along. And in January, the principal came to me and said, the teacher across the hall is already on modern France. You can't do this. You've got to get all the way through modern Europe by the end of the year, state requirement. I said, how can I possibly do it? We're going as fast as we can. He said, assign each kid a country to report on, and they'll read the reports to the class, and then you've covered it. So the kids came to me and said, I don't understand. And I said, I don't either, but we're required to do this. And so the difference between what happened the first half of the year and the second half was so stark, and we were required to do it. And now, as you say, with the testing, I don't see how anybody has time. Now I'm a strings teacher, but I don't see how anybody has time to do this stuff, because there's so much, their jobs are on the line that they've got to get high test scores from their kids. So good luck.
Okay, I think we have probably time for, there are 3 people who've been waiting. So Robin, Cheryl, and then in front of Gary. I know you've been waiting. Gary, can you wave at us so we know, so the person in front of you.
topic of it happening less in middle and high school and all of that, I think part of that is because it's still not happening everywhere at the elementary school level, right? And by the time you get to middle and high school, the walls, emotional walls that kids have built for themselves are that much higher. So I think the more we can get these sorts of things happening at the ground level in elementary school and even early childhood, then this becomes the way the kids are used to learning, and they're more open to it as well when they get older, as opposed to having this social wall in front of them that they don't want to become vulnerable to you as the teacher or to their classmates. So I'm a teacher at Lab, and so one of the things that's great for us, right, is that that time to collaborate with our colleagues is also sort of set up for us, and we have the freedom to do that. But I'm wondering for other people in the room or people on the panel, I think that that's something I found with friends of mine who are teachers in other places. They're like, how do you have time to collaborate with each other? How do you make the time to do this? And I sort of just smile and be like, because I work at an awesome school. Well, what's the answer for people who don't? How do they have time in their schedule to meet? I mean, how does your school set it up? Because I know you worked with the social studies teacher, and there was visual art, and there was music. And how does your school give you the room and the time to make that happen?
Well, my school, we do have sort of, in-service days and things like that, but the truth of the matter is that it's mainly on your own time. Like, you have to stay late and come in early and eat lunch together if you can, and have someone cover your classroom so that you can go sit and eat lunch with someone else or different things like that. And I think that's part of the burnout issue, is that it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. And so while, these in-service days come once a month maybe, or once every 2 months, and you probably, everyone in this room has experienced that, that it's not just, when the kids walk in and when the kids leave. It's well beyond all of that. So there's a lot of text messaging and sending messages and, sharing Dropbox folders and stuff as well as you're, trying to get ready for the next day. And part of it is, some of it's very exciting, because some of those, but some of it's also exhausting. Personally, doing projects like this, you don't really feel the exhaustion as much because you're, collaborating on something that's important and valuable. But then there's also some things where you just gotta, plan some things out, do some administration kind of stuff as well, and it just eats away at the time. And that's kind of the reality of it, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone has a different idea about that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm the arts integration coordinator at my school, and the classes that get the most arts integration are the ones with the teachers that stay the latest, because that gives us a chance to talk. And I have a very different schedule than the teachers, so when they have planning time, I don't. And yeah, we have this new thing this year where we're doing arts integration, but it's not really being done to the fullest extent because there's no time to collaborate.
And I think that you're raising a really important question in terms of our inclusion classrooms. When we have general educators and special educators team teaching, those classrooms are a lot more likely to do arts integration because those teachers are together, they're planning together anyway. And so, it really does suggest that there is this collaborative piece that you almost have to build in order to make it work. And that's a really important thing to recognize.
Robin, did you want?
I just wanted to say thank you all so much, and your presentations were both brilliant and creative and touching, and so I think they reached all of the centers you were talking about. Also wanted to say that I think Larissa would have loved this, and I don't know whether Vivian and Sarah and all are aware, but Larissa went to the Corcoran Museum School while she was in high school during the summer between freshman and sophomore year. And she was an avid artist throughout her whole life. Went back to painting, actually, when she moved to Denver. And in going through some boxes recently, actually a couple days ago, and we had lived in the town next to Reggio Emilia. We had lived in Parma, Italy. So when we came back to the States, I actually found a drawing, a painting, that she had been working on that was talking about, she wrote on there, and they call America the melting pot. And she had had some drawings because she was dealing with her integration back into the United States, coming in as an 11-year-old back into this country. And so very much an artist throughout and expressing herself, written and verbal. And the last expression of that, of course, was in her classrooms with her teachers, with her students, making beautiful classrooms for them with her art. So thank you all.
Allow me to join Robin to thank you for a program that was very approachable, very tangible, very meaningful. And Dean Sarah and I have been sitting together in the back for a few minutes, and also noting that this is essentially an AU program with AU faculty and AU students. And many of us sitting here as faculty and as people with long experience have been learning from two students about how they operate in their classrooms, how they are reaching out to students and teaching them in some different ways, and learning from your own students. And that's part of what this beauty is of this campus. Last week we spent all day Friday in a leadership conference among the leadership of the university, asking ourselves two questions with regard to the process of learning to write and quantitative reasoning, both of which are highly desirable by employers. And the questions that we asked of ourselves were, are we providing enough to our students? And are we demanding enough from them? And I think this kind of an approach of seeing what is provided to students and what they in turn provide and yet demand back from their students is a real articulation of how important that was. The other thing that this spoke to me about is, particularly as you were talking about children interpreting art and looking at a piece of art and reflecting on it and finding inferences and not simply reporting on it, is we're building cultural capital in very different ways and very subtle ways that become very much a part of a kid's toolbox. It's part of their fingertips when they begin to think about cultural capital. And one of the sessions that my colleague Alex Hodges and I attended during that session last week was looking at information literacy and digital literacy, and what happens to kids who have used it only as a play tool and not have had reason to use it for cultural capital purposes. Or what happens to a child who comes to a major university that had no library in their elementary school or in their high school, and they come with different deficits than other students do. And so we as a university community are working our way through approaching each one of these deficits, but also being able to accentuate the positives. So those of you who are AU students and others in this audience who are looking for research projects, the library owns the Sally Smith papers, the woman who founded the lab school. And if you are looking to do more research on her life, her teaching, we'd be very interested in working with you on those. We are also about to acquire and take ownership of a series of papers of a major columnist who worked in the area of parental advice. And when you marry those two together and look at something that is very definitive from an educational proposition in a classroom setting, and marry that with the kind of other advice about play dates and how kids get together on a playground that is outside of the area of classroom, I think we have another rich resource that you'll be able to explore when you're here. I want to thank all of you for coming this morning and for providing us such a wonderful experience. And I know Robin has spoken on behalf of her family, but I'll speak for the rest of you in the audience. And let us again thank our speakers.
I think that might be one. Good job.
Thank you.
That
was
okay,
fun.
so Project Zero.
I was nervous.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And
It was nice that I had in class to kind of
expeditionary
get some of
learning.
the
So I
things
wrote them
out of
down.
his
So
chat.
Project
So that actually
Zero.
was very valuable.